Hey folks, David Glenn of the North Carolina Sports Network here with Roy Lee Lindsey, the CEO of the North Carolina Pork Council. Roy Lee, you and I both love sports. We thank you for joining us today. We have top 25 polls in college football, college basketball, and other things. If we had a top 25 poll for the pork industry, where would we be ranked here in North Carolina?
Way at the top of that list. In North Carolina, we are the second largest state in the country in terms of number of pigs born in the state, and we are third in the number of hogs that we raise to market weight and send on into harvest and into the food supply. So a significant contributor to the state's economy as well as the national pork industry.
You were part of the Oklahoma Pork Council and even born and raised out there. Mm-hmm. I brag about North Carolina for a lot of reasons: food, sports, culture, and other things. After a lifetime in Oklahoma, what motivated you, besides the North Carolina Pork Council, or maybe that's part of it, to relocate here to North Carolina at this stage of life and career?
I had spent 22 years as the executive director with the Oklahoma Pork Council, and in that time, got to meet a number of people across the country that worked in this industry. You can't spend that much time in the industry and not get to know folks. And North Carolina Pork Council was searching for a new CEO here. Several folks in this area reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested? A number of the folks that raise hogs here in North Carolina also have farms in Oklahoma. I knew a bunch of the people, and so it seemed like a reasonable opportunity to move up in the world, if you will. If we're third in total hog production, Oklahoma's 10th. So it was a significant, it was a step up in class, if you will. We're going to go from AA to the big leagues right quick. And so tremendous opportunity. I knew the people, I knew the industry, and felt like I could bring them 20 years of experience into a state that needed that kind of leadership with the council.
Part of my time in North Carolina has been learning little by little about the place of agriculture more generally in our state's economy, but also working with the folks at the North Carolina Pork Council. The pork industry is more specific part and huge chunk, really, of our economy. How do you put that in perspective? Because I've learned, isn't ag number one overall, and pork is a big chunk of that?
So part of the transition for me from Oklahoma to here was I just didn't recognize how big a state from an agricultural perspective North Carolina really was. So yes, agriculture is the number one industry in the state of North Carolina. It's now north of $100 billion annual impact to the state's economy. And the pork industry is the second largest segment of that economy. So we're talking about 44,000 jobs. We're talking about $10 billion annually in terms of economic activity here in the state. So tremendously important to the vitality of rural North Carolina. These are jobs, these are folks that their kids attend rural schools, they're active in their communities, they attend their churches, they are participants in their society, they're around their farms, and it's critically important to rural North Carolina.
You're a graduate of Oklahoma State University. Maybe we can pick your brain about the Bedlam rivalry against that other school, the University of Oklahoma. But you know, assuming your 3 years here, you've picked up, we're a big sports state. It's kind of cool that y'all have turned the pork industry into a sport in a way, in part by sponsoring the Whole Hog Barbecue Championship every year. I mean, that sounds competitive. I know you raise you give out essentially a championship crown once a year. How does that work, and how does one qualify even to get into that?
So as you look across the state throughout the year, you will see folks having local whole hog barbecue championships or contests, and they have them all across the state. There's about one every weekend, if you will. Some of those events are sanctioned by us. If you follow our rules, then you can have a sanctioned event. You win that sanctioned event, then you get invited to participate in the state championship. So when you come to the Whole Hog Barbecue State Championship in Kinston in November, you will see the 25 or 30 best whole hog cooks in North Carolina, which means the best whole hog cooks in the world. And so, and yes, we'll have prizes for different categories within that contest, but somebody's going to walk away and be recognized as the state champion with the big championship ring and the giant trophy and all of those things.
CEO is a nice title. Does that allow you to appoint yourself to be one of the tasters? Can I get on that panel?
Sure. If you would like to come join us, we'd be happy to have you. I don't want to be a judge because that's too much for me, but there is nothing better than following the judges around and talking to the cooks and getting some sample. Like the judge has just been through here, just sampled, just did the judging on this pig. Now I can get in there and get a sample of that. Still hot. It's exactly what the judges got. That's about as good as it gets right there.
Thanks in part to the North Carolina Pork Council, we have created a statewide traveling circus. We call it the Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which allows us to visit a lot of the top towns in college football and high school football towns across North Carolina. This year, our stops include North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, and of course, near where we're sitting right now, North Carolina State University. I was fascinated to learn that the pork industry and those two, among other major universities on North Carolina soil, have a pretty intimate relationship. Tell us more about that.
Well, if you go back and look at the history of raising hogs here in North Carolina, what you'll find is that NC State has been instrumental in the growth of the industry and the development of the systems we use today, from housing animals to how we manage the environment. And it dates back 100 years here. And so today we have active partnerships with the folks at North Carolina A&T. They have a fully functioning swine farm, both with indoor units where they're raising hogs indoors, as well as outdoor units for folks that are in smaller production. We have a partnership as well with NC State and their College of Agriculture and their Animal Science Department. And it's a great partnership for us. I mentioned we got 44,000 people working in the industry, and I could put a whole bunch more to work if we could just find people that wanted to come work. And so that partnership with those universities allows us to tap into outstanding young talent. They get hands-on experience at the school, and then we can put them to work in the farm. We can put them to work in a processing facility. We need folks that know science and technology. We got database to manage, and you name it, we've got a job for you somewhere.
You mentioned the environment. Everybody would know in a college football setting, if there's a hurricane in the forecast, you better have a contingency plan. In fact, NC State and Notre Dame played 7 years ago with Hurricane Matthew coming down upon us. In the North Carolina pork industry, you have to have a contingency plan, I guess, all year long, but especially during hurricane season. And really, I've learned through the North Carolina Pork Council that you have become more and more environmentally friendly over the course of that 100-plus year history. Tell us more about what has been happening in that area of the universe, because many folks might not equate the pork industry with environmentally friendly business.
Right. I've always believed that farmers were the original environmentalists. They're going to do what they have to do to take care of their land, what they need to do to take care of their land. Because if you don't take care of it, it's not productive. There's a misconception out here that, well, you don't need to take good care of your animals because, that's a commodity to you. Well, that's not true. Healthy animals are productive. They're efficient. We want the healthiest, the best cared for animals we can get. Same applies to our farm ground, whether we're growing crops, whatever that may be. So we work with the folks at NC State, the folks at A&T. We work with agronomists. We talk to folks on the environmental side. How can we better manage what we do? And the goal is to be a little bit better every single day. Now, when you ask about hurricanes, what do we do for preparation? We'll start working in March and trying to get ourselves prepared for hurricane season. We will monitor the weather. We will make sure that the levels in our lagoons, the height of the water in the lagoon, is such that we can sustain a 24-hour, 25-year storm event, plus some additional space that the state mandates. We are as highly regulated an industry in terms of agriculture as there exists anywhere in the country right here in North Carolina. So our folks do their part every single day to be prepared should there be a hurricane, and we learn something every time we go through a storm. We're always trying to get just a little bit better.
Roy Lee Lindsey is the CEO of the North Carolina Pork Council, joining us here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Okay, back to your Oklahoma State grad status. As you shared earlier, the Cowboys contests against those hated Oklahoma Sooners, the origin of the Bedlam name for that rivalry, which is the name known across 50 states really for that famous rivalry, you told me didn't even start with football, so you can elaborate and educate us on that. But here in North Carolina, the closest equivalent we would have to your Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, would be UNC against NC State. It doesn't have a nickname. So I think we have an opportunity with the North Carolina Pork Council. I don't know if you would accept Bacon Bowl, if you would accept Barbecue Bowl, if you have another idea, I'm all ears. But share that sports history from the mindset of an Oklahoma transplant.
Yeah, I think over the last 20 years, folks have become far more familiar with the Bedlam series and the Bedlam football game between Oklahoma State and OU, and that's come with the rise of Oklahoma State football. They've gotten significantly better since Mike Gundy took over as head coach 19 years ago. But Bedlam itself started in wrestling, and so we apply Bedlam to the entire sports. There's a trophy given out at the end of the year. The Bedlam used to be the Bedlam Bell. I don't know what they call it now, but the Bedlam Trophy goes to the athletic department that wins the most sports contests throughout the year. So you're in the same conference, or at least we are in the conference today. Next year it'll be different. But it was from basketball, men's and women's, softball, baseball, track and field, wrestling, football, obviously. Whatever sport that we might be competing in, there are points awarded for winning your games, and I am, as a proud alumnus, Oklahoma State's owned that trophy now for 5 or 6 years in a row, by having the better overall athletic program. And it's sponsored by different folks. So, hey, could we get a contest started here in North Carolina that we think barbecue would be a perfect title for something along that line, because barbecue's part of the culture here, just like the sports are part of the culture.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Barbecue is part of the culture here in a slightly different way, right? When you were in Oklahoma, if you thought barbecue, it was slightly different than what you think here today. Just for those who are more North Carolina-centric minded, remind us of how, in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, barbecue was actually used to describe like a picnic in your backyard, which I've learned in the South. Don't ever say that.
Hot dogs are not barbecued.
Correct. So tell us how that works, because around here, we have the Eastern barbecue versus Western barbecue debate. You can chime in on that later if you'd like. But it is different in other parts of the country, right?
Yeah, in Oklahoma is kind of then that unique place in the country where it's a blend of Kansas City style barbecue and Texas. And Texas barbecue there mostly is going to be brisket. They're going to talk about beef. You'll see barbecue chicken places, and you'll see ribs. So you'll see pork ribs, you'll see brisket. That's the standard when you think barbecue fare, Oklahoma, Texas, even up into Kansas City. But the sauce is very different. So Texas is going to be a lot of dry rubs, not as much sauce, if you will. Oklahoma's kind of a blend in there. You get out here, and Eastern North Carolina typically is whole hog barbecue. We cook the whole pig, we chop it up, we sauce it with a vinegar-based, pretty strong vinegar-based sauce, if you will. Western is going to be more pieces of the pig. We're going to cook pork butts, which is actually a shoulder cut, and then we're going to sauce it. And it has a little more tomato to that sauce than does Eastern. Both very good. But this kind of depends on where you were raised. If you ask the folks in Eastern North Carolina, there is no other kind of barbecue, and it's almost sacrilege to call something else that. If you ask the folks elsewhere, they'd tell you the folks in the East are a little crazy. I have figured out the best piece of that barbecue world is, you mentioned the whole hog barbecue contest earlier. You get you a nice piece of that crispy skin. When they crack it open, you get a nice piece of that crispy skin, and you just lay some of that fresh pork right on top of it, and you cannot get a better bite anywhere. You can put sauce on it if you want it, but it generally doesn't need it. It is incredible.
I'm going to try that on your recommendation. Speaking of football, tailgating, sports, all the rest, would you advise tailgaters out there differently if they had, let's say it's a noon football game where your tailgate is a morning tailgate, and I think bacon for some reason when it's the morning. Whereas maybe a 7:30 game, you have essentially an evening tailgate, late afternoon.
Sure.
Are your pieces of advice different based on when the tailgate is leading into a football game or even a hockey game here?
I think that depends on what your preferences are, how early you want to get to the stadium, what do you want to do, where do you want to do that. For breakfast, for me, if we had an 11 a.m. in the Central, see, it's on noon kickoff here, you get Central Time, they're 11 a.m. kickoffs.
Right.
But for that morning kickoff, go to the store and you can find the blends that are potatoes and sausage and peppers that's already cooked up. Get you some liquid eggs if you want, and you can throw that in a skillet on your grill or whatever, and you can make breakfast burritos real easy, real simple. Little cheese,
Nice.
little salsa, whatever. It's a quick and easy piece, and if you've got all that, then you come back out after the game and you got time to throw some bratwurst on the grill. You got time to buy you some ground pork and make pork burgers out of it, just like you would with ground beef, but use ground pork. And I guarantee you, when you get that first bite, you're going to go, wow, have I been missing out all of my life.
And the evening is slightly different?
Evening, you can do anything you want.
Wide open.
If you've got all day, you can put a pork butt on the smoker. You can put a pork loin on the smoker. One of the most economical cuts of meat, if you need to feed a lot of people, is a pork loin.
Yeah.
Because you can buy a whole pork loin for $1.99 a pound roughly. It's about 8 pounds, and you should be able to feed 20 people pork chop sandwiches with that. Put it on the smoker, cook it. The key to cooking whole muscle cuts of pork is don't overcook it. So whole muscle cuts would be 145 degrees, get you a meat thermometer, 145 internal temperature, let them rest for 3 minutes, and then you're ready to carve it and eat it.
In my 37 years in North Carolina, I have occasionally encountered what's called the North Carolina Barbecue Trail. So I have seen it in little pieces, but I've never really known how to put the big picture together. It's like missing the forest for the trees. How do you describe to someone who's only half understands it, what is the North Carolina Barbecue Trail, and where is it?
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And one of the great things about like your tailgate tour is you travel across the state. As folks come out, if you'll just Google up North Carolina Barbecue Trail, it will tell you where all the restaurants are that do barbecue that have opted to be a part of that system. And you can find them in every corner of the state. You can find them in every small town, and every one of them is just a little bit different. That's the great thing I think about North Carolina barbecue, is they're different from place to place. And so I could eat barbecue in this little town, and next week I'm in that little town, and I can order the exact same plate, and it's going to have a little bit different taste, a little bit different flavor. And so it's not eating the same thing over and over again. It's always something different and something new. And it's kind of unique to this area. You don't see that many barbecue places. I didn't see them like that in Oklahoma. There were some good barbecue places, but not the quantity that you see around here.
As a business owner myself here in North Carolina, I've become interested in the fact that on the one hand, the pork industry in North Carolina can be super huge. I think y'all, or we as a state, have a bacon processing plant that is like among the biggest in the world or something. But at the same time, there's a smallness in a different way, because I know the number of pork farmers is more than 2,000, right? Yep. So how do you describe the bigness, the smallness? It just seems like a fascinating interaction of big and small.
Yeah, and the world's largest pork hog harvesting facility is here in North Carolina. Okay. And we're very proud of that. It's modern facilities, allows us to handle animals efficiently, safely, care for the animals as they go through the process. But we have more than 2,000 family farms that are participating in the pork industry here in North Carolina. Some farms are a little bigger, some are a little smaller, but what ultimately it all comes back to is the people that are engaged. And these are the folks that serve on their school boards, they serve on their church boards, they volunteer at the fire department. These are the people that make the small towns in North Carolina what is so great about being in a small town in North Carolina. And I like to think of them kind of as that fabric. Agriculturalists, farmers and ranchers, they're just kind of that fabric that binds rural North Carolina together, and we're so proud of the work those folks do, not just to raise hogs and to do that very well, but also to invest back in their community with their time, their energy, their resources.
For those who want to learn more about the pork industry here in North Carolina and educate yourself in really some fascinating ways, as I did myself, remember the website ncpork.org. You can also follow on social media. Of course, the handle there is at @ncpork. As a longtime interviewer, I always like to end an interview, and as I'm thanking you for your time, Roy Lee, with, is there anything I forgot to ask you about that you'd like to share with the sports fans of North Carolina, the citizens of North Carolina, because you really have a central place. You and your organization have a central place in our state's culture, clearly our economy, given the numbers you've shared today. What did I forget to ask you?
I don't know if you forgot anything, but just I come back to there are a couple of things that drive what we do every day. One is this constant desire to be just a little bit better every day. We learn something every day we work with animals. We learn something every day we work on the farm. And if we can take that and apply it to everything else we do, our personal lives, our professional lives, and be just a little bit better tomorrow than we were today, by the time we get to the end of the year, by the time we get to the end of the decade, we've made a real difference in where we go. And raising hogs is North Carolinian. It's a part of who we are. Barbecue is a part of who we are. Sports is a part of who we are. And that's what made this partnership, I think, so natural fit for us as we were looking at it. So thanks for coming. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you for allowing us to come, and thank you for the partnership. Really, the North Carolina Sports Network, the Old North State Tailgate, might not exist if not for the North Carolina Pork Council. You would exist without us. We might not exist in year one without you. So we thank you for your time today. It's been a fun conversation. Good luck to your Cowboys the rest of the way. You're probably wise to not adopt either the Tar Heels or the Wolfpack.
I think the one challenge folks are going to see here is we talk about expansion of conferences and you're bringing teams from the West Coast. Oklahoma State played in Mountain Time here recently, and that game didn't kick off until 10:30 North Carolina time. Those games on the West Coast will be, you'll have some adjustment to go with what that looks like time-wise.
You've got an adjustment as a sports fan coming up here because I don't know how they're going to handle it. You might know the answer. The Cowboys and the Sooners have been playing each other in football. I mean, I don't know if it stopped during World War II or something like that, but essentially for 100+ years. And now, not yet, but as you said earlier, starting next year, they're not in the same league anymore.
Right.
Do we know how that's going to go? Because if
at present for football, they're not going to play.
Okay, it's not on the
because the football schedules, you do them so far out, so many years. I mean, folks today could tell you they've got games scheduled into 31, 32. And when you're doing that, if you want out of that game, it costs you money to get out of that game, or you've got to adjust the schedule. And so to take out one of those games every year to replace it with now a non-conference game, that gets really tough. And so when you have those kinds of rivalries and you split them, that's what makes that's Colorado, Nebraska don't play every year anymore.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of those things that create those challenges. We'll see. I think they should keep playing. I think it's good for both schools. But if it doesn't fit the schedule and you're already committed for the next 5 years or 6 or whatever, it's going to be a little while before they get that one back on the calendar.
There aren't many things that require the North Carolina legislature to get involved in sports, but if the Wolfpack and the Tar Heels stopped playing every year, that would be on the short list of things that motivated a whole lot of people from a lot of different categories to get in the middle of it all. We'll see how it shakes out in Oklahoma. We're happy to have Roy Lee Lindsey here in the state of North Carolina. He is the CEO of the North Carolina Pork Council. He is our guest today on One Carolina. We thank him for his time. We thank the Pork Council for their great partnership. I am David Glenn for the North Carolina Sports Network. Thank you for being with us today.